Well, that's a good start. Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm Bradley Graham. I'm the co-owner of Politics and Prose, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine, and on behalf of the entire PNP staff, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. What a marvelous crowd. And what a great space for a book event. Thanks to the Warner Theater for making this spacious place available. As much as we at PNP do enjoy hosting our authors at our store on Connecticut Avenue Northwest, we had a feeling that a somewhat larger venue would be needed for this one. In fact, this is the largest author talk that PNP has ever sponsored. And tickets sold out in a matter of minutes. So congratulations, you all are the lucky ones. Since its release a week ago, What Happened? Hillary Clinton's new book about the 2016 election has landed on the bestseller list and generated seemingly nonstop commentary and conversation. Some things never change. Hillary has given a number of media interviews about the book, but tonight she's here with us in person for what is the first stop on a 15-city tour that will take her across the United States and Canada. In the days and weeks immediately following the election, Hillary took long walks in the woods with her dogs, consumed more than a few glasses of Chardonnay, and tried to regain her bearings. Now, 10 months later, she's back with renewed strength and fresh purpose, and with a thoughtful and very personal account of why she lost and the lessons that can be learned from what was, in so many ways, a deeply confounding and disturbing race. Many, of course, are very familiar with Hillary's long and storied career, from lawyer and advocate for children to First Lady of Arkansas, First Lady of the United States, U.S. Senator from New York, U.S. Secretary of State, and the Democratic Party's presidential candidate. She is the daughter of Hugh and Dorothy, wife of Bill, mother of Chelsea, and grandmother of Charlotte and Aidan. Along the way, Hillary also has managed to write books. In fact, this is her sixth, and reviewers of it so far seem to agree on at least one thing. In these pages, she is less guarded than ever before, more revealing, blunt, and authentic. She says she didn't intend the book to be a comprehensive recap of the campaign, and it isn't. But it does convey, with raw emotion, humor, and insight, how it felt to run for president as the first woman nominated by a major American political party, and how it has felt to deal with the aftermath of a shocking defeat. And one other thing comes through loud and clear in What Happened. Hillary intends to remain active and to speak out. Hillary will be in conversation up here with my wife, Lissa. The two of them go back a long way. At various times over the past 2.5 decades, Lissa has worked with Hillary as chief speechwriter, communications director, book collaborator, and campaign advisor, including several stints helping in the 2016 campaign. Currently, Lissa is writing her own book about her experiences as part of Hillaryland, the small group of staffers, mostly women, who started with Hillary 25 years ago in the White House and have remained in her orbit since. I'd also like to take a moment to recognize that in the audience this evening are a number of members of Hillary's 2000 campaign staff. They're out there somewhere. They toiled mightily for months to help their candidate earn nearly 3 million more votes than the Republican nominee. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the woman who won more than 65,800,000 votes in the last election, Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Thank you all so much for coming. You sound like 65,800,000 people, which is great. And it's such a great crowd. Thank you all for being here. And thank you for being here. I feel like we just did this, but that was 3 years ago. We did it for your last book, Hard Choices. We're back for What Happened. It's what happened. It's not what happened, question mark. It's not what happened, exclamation point. It's not what happened, ... It's just what happened. But congratulations, book number 6. By the way, produced in record time, I might add. And it's a very personal book, which I'm sure those of you who've read it already know, and if you've watched the interviews and you've heard about it, you know. But I just want to say one thing before we get started. Of course, it's about the 2016 election, and because Hillary Clinton is Hillary Clinton, it of course delves deeply into a very broad range of very, very important issues, from the erosion of our democratic institutions, the growing signs of totalitarianism creeping into too many aspects of our lives, the rolling back of voting rights, healthcare, environmental protections, economic and social justice, and of course, ongoing, seemingly daily, if not hourly, and more overt examples of sexism and racism across our country. So what I want to just say as we get started is that if you don't have it yet, when you're going to pick your book up on the way out, you know, in Washington, there's that thing where you look in the index and you kind of pick and choose what you're going to read. Start at the beginning, read all 469 pages, because she has a lot to say, and she has a lot to say about really, really, really important challenges facing this country. And if you actually read from start to finish, you will learn a lot, and it's just fascinating and really important stuff in the book, so thank you for that. But tonight we're going to try to keep it a bit more personal, if that's okay. And I want to start really with how this book even came about. And I'm going to remind you, you may not remember this, but you and I had a conversation way back in the winter, early winter, and you mentioned to me that you were thinking of writing a book about the election. And then we had several more conversations about this over the next weeks and months. And each time I said to her emphatically, "You are nuts. That is a crazy idea. Why would you do that? It's way too soon. You're still processing everything. We're all still processing everything." I don't know about the rest of you, and I don't know about you, but everybody I know was experiencing weird things like insomnia and anxiety, gastrointestinal disorders. In fact, a friend of mine who's a doctor in Washington said it's an election-related syndrome known as Trump-urea. Okay, so we're all going through all this, right? And so I just didn't see how you could possibly, in such a short space of time and so soon after this election, process all of it for yourself. And of course, you're the central actor in it. So I advised you consistently not to write it. And of course, thankfully, she didn't listen to me. So that was very wise on your part. And now here we are with this wonderful book. And I just am wondering, though, how did you process it so quickly? And apparently, this did not involve any therapy along the way.
Well, that's a sign of something. Well, actually, it was my therapy, to be really clear. Lissa has been a friend of mine and a colleague of mine for a long time now, and is a terrific writer, was a great reporter when she worked for the Post and other publications. So I take what she says very seriously when it comes to writing, and she did come to see me, like a number of my friends who rallied around, came to support me, just listen to me vent, share their concerns and worries. And I had, after the election, as you can read in the book, pretty much nothing I wanted to say to anybody. I was so devastated, and it was incredibly painful. And it took weeks of just getting up every day, cleaning closets, going for walks in the woods, all the things that I did to begin to clear my head. But of course, other people were commenting and writing about the election, and I just didn't think there was a broad enough view, really a comprehensive understanding of what it looked like to me in real time and what I believed happened, but I wasn't sure, and I knew it would take a lot of analysis and evidence gathering, and I do kind of believe in facts, and
Shocking.
So, I just began to talk and listen to people, gather information, and I think that it hit me really around the inauguration. People had talked to me about, well, what are you going to do? And, will you write something else? And I was still just trying to muddle through. It really hit me that there were these very important issues that needed to be discussed, debated even, that our democracy and country relied upon that kind of self-examination. And I thought, well, I need to know what happened, and I need to be as honest, candid, open as I possibly can in order to figure it out for myself. And maybe doing it in a book would provide the discipline, the deadline to try to think it through. And so really, starting in February, I dove in and I just decided I was going to write it, and it was painful. I say in the book that, I'd write about something and I'd have to go lie down because it was just so hard to think about the mistakes I made, the missed opportunities, but then also to come to grips with these other big forces at work that I think had a determinative impact on the outcome. So it ended up being really cathartic for me personally, and from what people are telling me as I've begun to start doing book signings and talking about the book, I think it does provide some catharsis and some opportunity for reflection for a lot of other people too, and I'm very happy about that because there's some really important issues we have to come to grips with, and I wrote it not just to say what happened, but what we need to do to make sure what happened doesn't happen again. And that's what I'm going to spend a lot of time on.
Amen. Just to follow up for a second on this, how hard it is. I mean, as I said, you're the central actor and you're writing about yourself, and it obviously was a mind-boggling experience. You and I share a favorite author in Cheryl Strayed. I don't know how many of you have read Wild or seen the movie. And you have a quote from her in the book, actually. But, and I think I may have mentioned to you this once. She once said to me, I asked her, how do you write about these things that are so deeply personal? And she said, I write to get to a deeper truth. If I'm not going to be honest with myself, why do I bother to write? But getting to that deeper truth, as you've experienced, is hurtful, overwhelming, painful, can be sad, and you have to deal with things that are intensely private. So I'm just wondering, did you censor yourself at all? Were there times when words or thoughts it was just too much and you couldn't go there? Or what did you do to try to get to that next level?
Well, I ended up not censoring my thoughts, not censoring what I put into the book. I will admit I censored some of the original language I used.
Oh, shucks. You should have left that
yes, some of those early venting sessions, I had a great team of people who vented with me and did research for me and helped, me better explain what I was venting about. But I didn't hold back at all on what I saw as, my own shortcomings and my deep disappointment, not just for me, obviously, but for the country. So it was not censored. It was really candid, and it was something that did help me get to some deeper and bigger truths about me, about our country, about some of the really difficult forces that we have to face, the concerns I have about, I'm sure we'll get into this, everything from sexism and misogyny and race and the Russians and, this voter suppression. I mean, there's a lot there that I was learning as I was writing. Because when you're in the middle of a campaign, and I know there are people here who have been involved in campaigns, and for that I thank you. When you're in the middle of it, you are so focused on the immediate tasks. I mean, you know what the overall goal is, obviously to win, and you've got your strategies and your tactics lined up, but boy, every day is, 18 hours of just the hardest concentration and work trying to move it forward. It's hard to lift your head up, and sometimes it's hard to really understand everything that's happening at the same time. So being able to step back a little, go through it, take it apart, look at it, analyze it, and then write about it helped me a lot.
Did you learn anything about yourself that you didn't know?
I really believed that, and it was, I think in retrospect, it was a misconception, or it was certainly out of sync with the time in which we're living and the candidate I ended up running against, because I did have this idea based on my prior experiences in presidential campaigns, really going way back into the late 60s and 70s, that it mattered greatly if you could make clear what you wanted to achieve. It didn't have to have all the details, but that it was important to tell people what you wanted to do, because then when you were in office, they could judge you on whether or not you were fulfilling that commitment you made. So we spent a lot of time making sure that everything I said about policy and how we'd pay for things and all of that was just bulletproof, because I kept thinking at some point it's really going to matter. And for all sorts of reasons, it didn't. And so I think I stayed way too focused on a path that was not the direction that the campaign was heading, because of the pressures from outside forces, because of the reality TV candidate I was running against. I think that I was not as adept or as quick to try to figure out, okay, what is a better way for me to try to communicate this? So, these are things that you do the best you can, and you think you're running one kind of campaign, and you realize that the press is not covering the policy you're putting out every day. They're covering an empty podium. And I kept thinking, well, we're still going to break through because people really do care what kind of jobs and infrastructure and healthcare and other things you want to do for them and their families and their incomes. But there was a disconnect. And so I learned that I just wasn't, I wasn't as, I think, quick to try to make some adjustments along those lines.
But you also say in the book that you developed a new appreciation for big, simple ideas. I think that's part of what you're getting at, isn't it?
Well, there's a difference. I mean, the big, simple ideas, I still believed, you know, that a big, simple idea like we're going to raise taxes on the wealthy, that's a big, simple idea. And I did have that idea very much centered in my campaign, but there's also, I think, an important debate about, in politics today, when we have a really intense, quick movement of news, and it's a very short attention span, and social media plays a bigger and bigger part, you know, trying to develop a relationship with voters or to engender confidence in voters that you know what you're talking about and you're going to deliver because you do understand the complexities may not be as significant as just repeating those big ideas over and over again and leaving the details for later. Who knows, though, by 2020, maybe people will want to know details again and policy again. So you never know. Well,
and to be clear, she's not saying big, simple ideas without details, just not outlining every single detail, you know, ahead of time necessarily, which I thought that was a pretty interesting observation. Just one other quick thing about what it feels like, because you're so revealing in the book about what it feels like to be a presidential candidate. And of course, you've got constant incoming, right? Good, bad, medium. You're trying to assess all sorts of information from all sorts of people all the time. And it was interesting to me in the book that you say in a number of places that there were times when you wish you had struck back, when you'd been criticized or challenged by Bernie on Wall Street and other things, by Matt Lauer in that really awful interview, by Comey, and then, of course, we had the Jaws imitation by Trump on the debate stage. You know, so in each of those, it sounds like you're, oh, I just want to say also, by the way, even though you didn't say it, do you know how much it warmed the hearts of tens of millions of Americans to know that you thought about saying, back up, you creep? That's great. But in those situations, it was really, honestly, it was just such a relief to know you were even thinking about it. But in those situations, you weren't able to do that, and you felt yourself constrained. You say you felt like you were in a straitjacket at times. What is it that makes it so hard to be able to do that in those situations? And I'm sure it has something to do with being a woman, but I'll let you answer that.
Well, I think it does have a lot to do with being a woman, because it's very hard to be perceived as strong as opposed to aggressive or any other word you can think of. And so part of the challenge is how you modulate, how you present yourself in a mature, appropriate way as a woman seeking a job no other woman has ever had. And I write a whole chapter on being a woman in politics, but much of what I say goes for being a woman in business, being a woman in any profession. It's not just politics. And I think, as I tried to describe my thought process up on that stage in the second debate, it was hard. We had practiced what I would do if he invaded my space, because we kind of assumed he would, because he had his own issues that he was trying to, you know, push through at that time. And So we knew it, but once you're there and it's actually happening to you in real time in front of, I don't know, 60 million people or something, you are discomforted, you are annoyed, you are a little frustrated that he is stalking you and staring at you. And so I was going back and forth, but I had believed that it's better not to show that kind of reaction in the middle of a presidential debate. And as you might think back, funny gestures, facial expressions, heavy sighs, things really do affect viewers. And I just ended up believing that in addition to the gender-linked aspect of this, there was a history of people in presidential debates who had deviated in a way to show frustration, anger, dismissiveness, whatever their feelings were, and paid a heavy price for it. And I thought, whatever price they paid, I would pay double or triple. Mm-hmm. And so I just thought, okay, I'm going to, I sort of thought at the end of the day, people would say, yeah, we really do want somebody who's calm and composed in the Oval Office. And so I was aware of all the different cross currents, but I carried on in a way that I thought was what a president or someone who wants to be president should do.
Well, and you say in the book, and I think you're referring to longer than this campaign, that you sort of have to wear your composure like a suit of armor, and that's what you did.
Yeah, but everybody in the audience knows that feeling that the next day or the middle of the night you wake up and say, oh, if only I had said that. There always is that. I thought that it's the toughest job in the world. It's a job that requires, or at least used to require, a level of curiosity and focus and things that you'd want to think somebody with that responsibility would have. And I honestly believe we were in a different kind of campaign, unlike any I'd ever seen before. I've watched people go up and down in campaigns. I've worked in them. I, was deeply involved, obviously, in my husband's 2 campaigns. I know the ebb and flow of a campaign. This was really different. And I don't think anybody fully grasped how it was a variation on a presidential campaign, unlike any we'd ever seen. And I, now looking back, see a lot of different, signals about that maybe I could have, and my campaign could have done a better job trying to figure out how to push back on or make more transparent so that people would understand. Boy, I'll tell you what, that campaign of his, they have the best empty podium that anybody's ever seen. Get people to think and even laugh a little bit about what was happening in that campaign. But, that didn't happen soon enough, and it didn't happen in quite enough places.
Did you watch the Emmys last night at all?
I did.
Well, and you and I think many people may know you and your husband are big fans of television dramas and comedies. And if you watched, as I'm sure many of you did, you know that The Handmaid's Tale was a big winner. And you and I have actually talked about that book in the past. Written in 1985, dystopian work of fiction that, of course, is now this wildly popular TV series that is about a liberal democracy slowly and very definitively becoming a totalitarian state, which of course is sadly and distressingly resonant at the moment. And that whole idea of the normalization of the abnormal is terrifying. By the way, doesn't it just bug you when people say Trump is this is the new normal. I mean, we should never call it normal, right? We should never say it's not normal. It's like the new abnormal. It's not the new normal. But I mean, seriously, it's terrifying, and The Handmaid's Tale resonates because of that. You do talk a lot about that in your book, and you know, from voter suppression, from the manipulation of the media to fake news to everything else, and just the assault on the democratic institutions we rely on that we need to be able to trust. Yeah. It's scary. And you, of course, you know, we'll get to the fake news Russia stuff in a minute, but.
Well, look, part of the reason I was motivated to write this is because of what happened at the inauguration, and I write the first chapter about what it felt like to go to the inauguration and what a hard decision it was, but how I thought that it was important to show continuity of our government. I was certainly hoping to hear words of reconciliation and bringing the country together after, you know, a very divisive campaign. Didn't hear that, and I felt very uneasy about that inauguration. I've been to a bunch of them, and I've been when people I supported won and people I supported lost. But this was different. This was not a normal inauguration. And then it was made even more surreal with the claims about the crowd size and the introduction of alternative facts. And then I started thinking, whoa, this is much more than just transfer from a two-term Democratic president to an unusual but you know, Republican president. And I just couldn't really grasp how big a challenge they intended to pose to facts and evidence and reason, all of which are fundamental to the functioning of a democracy like ours. And so when I saw that, I thought, you know, this is much, much bigger than any transfer of presidential power that I'm aware of in recent history, because of the assumptions that the new administration was operating on and the brazenness of their attempt to distort reality and impose their version of facts and truth on all the rest of us, despite what we saw with our own eyes. That bothered me greatly, because I've said before, if I had lost, you know, to another Republican candidate, somebody else had emerged from the Republican primary, I would have felt bad. I would have really been disappointed, but I wouldn't have worried about the fundamental future of our country, our institutions, our rule of law, and this imperative of reason that motivated our founders and which is still absolutely essential. So I think this became a resonant theme with me, because you can disagree about policies, you can disagree about all kinds of things, but you can't begin to chip away at the basis of our government's functioning and our democratic norms without paying a very big price. So yes, in the book, you won't be surprised, I mention The Handmaid's Tale, I mention 1984, I mentioned Brave New World, because I want readers to say, okay, I may not agree with everything she says, but you know what? I have to agree with this fundamental premise that we can't sacrifice truth and facts on the altar of partisanship and the desire on the part of a particular president and his administration to control the news, to undermine the First Amendment, to just create this alternate reality. Because I think the stakes of what we face in this time are just profound. And I've said before, and I will repeat it here, I think that this president and the people who serve him on this alternative reality track are posing a clear and present danger to the future of our country.
And I think one of the most powerful, clearest, most persuasive chapters in the book is the one about bots and trolls and Russians and fake news. And you begin that section of the book. I know one of your favorite books is Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, and you have a line from Dostoevsky that begins this section of the book: "When reason fails, the devil helps." And then, of course, you do talk about trolls, bots, fake news, conspiracy theories, and my favorite term, from Russia with no love. But in all seriousness, this is an incredibly clear connecting of dots based on what evidence is now available. Presumably, there will be more coming out, but anyway, thank you for that, because it's really essential that everybody read that. I've never had a chance to thank you for something publicly that I would like to thank you for now. How many of you were in Washington during what is now infamously known as Pizzagate? Okay. And those of you who've been to Politics and Prose on Connecticut Avenue know that the store is only a few doors down from Comet Ping Pong. And you, of course, were onto this stuff because of what was going on in the campaign before a lot of us realized the extent of it. And you and I spoke shortly after the election, and you knew that Comet was being targeted, that Politics and Prose and some of the other businesses were being targeted, and you actually said you were willing to speak out about it, for which we were grateful. At the time, everybody thought that we needed to all kind of lie low for a bit. The day that the gunman with the assault weapon walked into Comet on a Sunday afternoon, December 4th, about an hour after that, you and I communicated, and I told you what was going on, and you responded instantly, and we were so supportive, which was incredibly helpful. We were all on lockdown on the entire block with police running up and down the streets. And then, and people don't know this, a few days after that, you and your husband said, "What can we do to support Comet? Can we buy pizzas?" And you bought, I don't know how many pizzas, but it was a lot of pizzas, and sent them to a literacy program, an after-school literacy program in DC, which was never publicized. And you checked in on me a lot, because we weren't dealing with it in the same way Comet Ping Pong was, but we were also getting trolled in the whole 9 yards and harassment calls. I just can't tell you how important it was for me, for Brad, for our entire staff, for our entire block, for the people at Comet, to know that you and President Clinton were there for us, quietly, and nobody knew it. So I've never had a chance to thank you publicly, and I did want to do that, so thank you.
And, if I could just say a word, because we're in Washington, and this horrible chain of events happened here. But this is a terrible example of what can be done by people who are malicious, unacquainted with the truth, and pursuing their own agendas, whether it be commercial advantage, partisan advantage, or any other goal. For those of you who don't follow it or may not remember it, when John Podesta's emails were stolen, I hate the word hacked, they were stolen. They were stolen by the Russians. And they were then, through cutouts, given to WikiLeaks, which is nothing more than a tool of Putin and the Kremlin. And certainly people associated with Trump knew about it, because in August, Roger Stone was tweeting about how John Podesta would find himself, in the barrel some point ahead. So on October 7th, one of the more infamous days in the campaign, the day started with the Director of Homeland Security, the Secretary, Jay Johnson, the Director of National Intelligence, Jim Clapper, saying that with high confidence, they knew the Russians had been behind those hacks, those thefts of emails. That happened in the morning. Then the Hollywood Access tape broke a few hours later, and within 1 hour, such an amazing coincidence, WikiLeaks dumped all of John Podesta's personal emails. Now, if you read those emails, I think it's a little embarrassing to admit they're very anodyne, even boring. But because they were, the way that the Russians and their allies, whoever they turn out to be, were able to generate constant interest really was two factors. One, they sent the press on these wild goose chases all over the place. Oh, here comes 100 more, here comes 1,000 more, oh my gosh. And then, of course, the other was that they created the illusion of transparency. If you think you're getting something from, sort of behind the screen, maybe it's more legitimate, even though you're being played by a bunch of Russians. And the psychology of it was brilliant. And of course, it's part of the Russian propaganda effort, something called active measures, which they've used in many other settings, not just in our election. Well, you can only go so far with read these emails and listen to people, as in every campaign you can imagine, debate about what to do when and who says what and all of that. So they had to be weaponized. They had to have elements plucked out and perverted in a way that would be hard to imagine, and then sent back out into the cyber virtual world. So in one of the emails, John Podesta is talking about pizza. He's Italian and Greek,
And a very good cook.
And a very good cook, and yeah, his risotto recipe is still there if you want to see it. And I'm sure there's something very nefarious about that risotto recipe. So all of a sudden, John's writing about pizza, and one of these really, I consider, evil people in the media world and in the online world, out of whole cloth make up this story that John Podesta and I are running a child trafficking ring in the basement of the Comet Pizza Parlor.
By the way, there is no basement.
Yeah, there is no basement. Now, you would think people would be laughing like crazy, shaking their heads, but if you migrate that crazy story to Facebook posts, to news outlets, there are people who will believe that, including this very unfortunate young man in North Carolina who believed it. It was meant to be believed to influence voting. Even I have to say I don't believe it was meant to be believed to influence somebody to pick up an AR-15 and drive from North Carolina to Washington to liberate the imaginary children from the imaginary basement of the pizza parlor. But in came this young man believing that he was on a mission because he saw it on Facebook, he saw it in other places online, he saw it in, quote, news outlets, and so he was there on a mission of rescue. People could have gotten killed. He shot his automatic weapon off inside this pizza parlor. The street where Politics and Prose is was shut down. There was an active crime scene because people who cared more about weaponizing information, making negative stories up, than the truth, than facts, or even public safety, and certainly any concern about children was non-existent. They were determined to stimulate, to propagate the attitudes that would grab some people in some states, some congressional districts, some towns and counties, so that they would be saying, well, gosh, you know, if Hillary Clinton and her campaign chairman are doing something like that, they should go to jail. I can't vote for that. That's the worst example, but there are so many other examples that were the same pattern, from stealing to giving to WikiLeaks to propagating to weaponizing into somebody's, you know, Google chain, into somebody's Facebook post. And I think it's one of the most serious challenges we face going forward in politics, not just at the presidential level, but up and down, because if we don't get a handle on information that is not just controversial, protected by the First Amendment, but aimed at spreading lies to the extent that they can cause behavior like we saw in this terrible instance, it will not stop. And I'm glad that the Congress and others are looking at Facebook and Twitter and Google, because they are the vehicles, one of the very first vehicles to deliver this kind of information to people. But I was just terrified for Lissa and Brad and all their employees and everybody on that street, because I could see what the trafficking of that absolutely horrible information was meant to do, and it got out of hand, and we were just fortunate that nobody was injured.
And it you know, it keeps going, but the consolation, and there is consolation, is that the outpouring of support from our community was unbelievable. For Comet, for Politics and Prose, people feel tremendous ownership about their communities, and you know, and I might just say Mike Pence at that time was living about a mile away in a rented house before he could move into the vice president. We'd see his motorcade up and down. Up. Did he once think about coming in, buying a slice of pizza? Of course not. But the community has been fantastic, and any of you who've, you know, come to Comet or come to P&P after that, thank you. It really made a huge difference. Okay, I want to be a little lighter for a second here. So there's a very funny moment in the book where when you say that President Obama told you, don't try to be hip. You're a grandma. Just be yourself. And my question is, what did he think you were going to run off to a Soul Cycle class, or take a mixology course, or to chia pudding? I mean, what was he worried about?
Oh, there's probably so many examples that...
I know, I'm just wondering, because President Obama, I think it's okay, honestly. No,
no, he was an extraordinarily supportive and helpful friend throughout the whole campaign. He would call me periodically, and he would say, are you getting enough sleep? Are you, you know, eating well? I'd say, oh, I think I'm getting enough sleep. I think I'm eating well. And then he'd say, well, are you exercising? I'd say, well, you know, I think I'm getting enough sleep, and I think I'm eating well. But he really, you know, stayed up with me, stayed up with the campaign. And I can't remember which of the incidents he might have been referring to, but he was always just in my corner and had my back throughout the whole, you know, 18 months or nearly 2 years.
Okay, so you love words. She's a great writer herself, by the way. You love words. Your husband loved words. Did anybody see President Clinton's guest crossword puzzle in the New York Times a few months ago? That was pretty cool. So we're going to play a little word game, if that's okay. Are you up for this? Okay, it's going to get... have you ever heard of the game Boxers or Briefs?
What?
Boxers or Briefs? You know, like... If you're a guy, are you like boxers or briefs? So we're going to play that game, but don't worry, you don't have to answer that question. And I'm going to give you 2 words, and you just have to, without thinking, this book is very revealing, but you know, people know now exactly which kind of hot sauce you like, and they know that you do deep breathing and all that stuff. So we're just going to help them out with a few more things, and I'm going to give you 2 words. You're going to just immediately, whichever one most suits you, you're going to answer, okay? Ready?
Yeah, I do have to say a word about hot sauce first.
Okay. Help.
I mean, I have carried hot sauce since 1992. I just want you to know.
It is true.
And there were people who were actually accusing me of just making that up.
It's not made up.
No, it's not made up, but I do spend probably more time than I should in the book talking about hot sauce. So anybody want any recommendations, just let me know.
Okay, it's true. For as long as I've known you, hot sauce has been in your purse. Absolutely true. We can all vouch for her. Okay, you ready? So 2 words, you got to, okay. It's gonna get progressively a little harder, but we're not gonna do too many of them, okay? So, tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Beach or mountains?
What?
Beach or mountains?
Beach.
Okay. Shower or bath?
Well, these are all really unfair, and that is particularly unfair.
These are easy.
Because, I mean, really, it depends upon how much time you have.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, Pilates or yoga?
Yoga.
Vodka or Chardonnay?
Again, it depends upon how much time you have.
History or mystery?
Oh, historical mysteries. How was that?
Okay. Putin or Trump?
Yeah, well, I have to take that under advisement for the following reasons. I ran against both of them.
Excellent. I was going to say Comey or Comey, who you also ran against. Okay, I think we're going to take some audience questions. You guys did great questions. There were zillions of them. A lot of them were similar. And first of all, lots of people just said thank you. And I could go through a lot of cards that just said thank you. Quite a few also related to young people and young women especially and getting into politics. So here's one. And here's one that there are 2 that are sort of similar. What advice would you give to a young woman who wants to go into politics? And here's another one that's similar. Would you encourage your daughter to enter politics if she were interested, but you knew she'd experience the same level of sexism you've encountered during your political career?
Well, let me answer this question in general, because I would say the same thing to any young woman who were to ask. I'd say, look, even though I write at length about the challenges that women in politics face and point out it's not just me and it's not just Democratic women, it is unfortunately still a very, very tough double standard. I would still say that if you are willing to enter politics, either as a candidate, as a campaign staffer, as a person in government and public service, because that's how I view the bigger definition of politics, you just have to be prepared and try to have the confidence without being walled off, without being too defensive. And it's easy for me to say I've been all of those things at various points in my public career, but it's a really great experience. And it is important to have more women in politics, and it is important that we all support each other in the political arena. You know, one of the great quotes that I have loved for years is Eleanor Roosevelt saying, for any woman who enters the public arena, she needs to grow skin as thick as the hide of a rhinoceros, because you will be judged by everything from, you know, your hair to your voice to whether you are married or not married, whether you have children or don't have children. So it's a constant gotcha game. And you have to be clear about why you're going into politics and what you hope to achieve through your efforts. But I say in the book, you know, by pulling the curtain back and talking about how hard it is, I don't want to discourage anybody. I want people to be more aware of it so we can call it out for what it is. You know, but this is common across every walk of life. And there's a fascinating article in the New York Times sports section today about women in sports and the grief they take because of their voice. Yeah. And as somebody who has been called everything when it comes to, well, everything, but I'm thinking particularly about voice, it really struck home with me. You know, you just have to be prepared. You have to have at least a sense of humor to get through some of what you're going to face. But if you are prepared, if you educate yourself, if you are surrounded by good, you know, good supporters, friends, family, people who can tell you the truth, you know, like Lissa started off saying she told me it was a terrible idea to write this book. I am grateful for that because she's a friend. And you need friends who tell you when things are good and when things aren't so good. I think it's really important. So I've got this new organization called Onward Together that I've started, and really the primary purpose is to support groups that are recruiting young people, especially young women, training them, funding them. We also highlight and lift up wonderful groups like Indivisible, which is leading the charge to keep our attention where it needs to be. Like, we've got to stop this latest attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act that is going on. So I think there's a lot of good work to be done.
And Onward Together is really interesting because that was you and Howard Dean. You met with Howard Dean earlier this year, our friend Judith McHale, who were so instrumental in really thinking outside the box about how to bring young people, get them involved, engage them, support them, because they know a lot more than people like
Well,
us.
I mean, it was so great. After the election, one of the things that kind of, you know, got me out of bed and moving again were the stories I would hear. People would call and say, oh, there's this new young group that one of your campaign staffers has started called Run for Something, and it's aiming at recruiting more young people. Or there's a group called Swing Left. They're going to try to flip the House. Or a group that I've worked with before, Emerge America, which has a great record of electing women. Color of Change, which focuses on, you know, African-American young people, getting them into politics and doing some of that work. So I felt like there's so much we can do, because at the end of the day, and I just have to say this and hope you help me figure out how we're going to make it happen. Everything we do, we can write books, we can speak out, we can go to protests, we can recruit people to run for office. But if we don't get people to vote, starting in Virginia and New Jersey, and then in 2018, we're not going to turn this around.
Yep. And it is gratifying to see how many people who were never thinking about getting into office now are. A few more audience questions. Do you really keep that hot sauce in your bag? Also, we love you. I think you already answered that. We appreciate you. What should the Democratic Party run on in the next election? It's not an easy question.
Well, I think it has to be both economic justice and social justice. And look, you know, we have the better side of the argument about how to make the economy grow, to be inclusive, to lift incomes, provide opportunities. We just have to keep plugging away at it and not get discouraged, and we have to keep calling out the other side, whose answer to everything is tax cuts for the wealthy. I almost can imagine a scene in, some Republican member's home, and the kid calls out and says, hey, I don't feel good. Well, take a tax cut for the wealthy, and we'll wake you in the morning, see how you're doing, because it answers everything, whatever ails you. That's really the inside story of what's going on with this attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act. It's to free up money for tax cuts for the wealthy. So we have to keep talking over and over again and not get discouraged, because sometimes we think we make a great argument, but it doesn't, take the first time. We have to keep going at it time and time again. But we can't be promoting and standing up for economic justice to the exclusion of turning our back on all the progress we've made in moving people forward on civil rights and women's rights and gay rights and human rights. So I don't buy this false dichotomy. You can only be for the economy, or you can only be for people's civil rights. That's ridiculous. We want everybody to rise. We want everybody to have a better opportunity and future going forward.
Well, let's talk about women for a second, because we both care about women, and I think most people here do. Just getting back to The Handmaid's Tale, the other big subtext of The Handmaid's Tale is how women treat other women, especially women with power with women who don't have power, women who've been marginalized, and it can be very cruel the way women treat other women. You've experienced a little bit of that yourself, obviously.
Right. Well, yeah, I'm glad you asked about it, Lissa, because I write about this, and I'll start with a conversation I had shortly before announcing that I was going to run. And it was with Sheryl Sandberg, somebody that I've known for a long time and really appreciate the work that she's done with Lean On, with the research, working with professors at Stanford, at the University of Pennsylvania, marshaling, again, facts and evidence about what actually happens in women's lives, how we're perceived, how we perceive ourselves. So she said she wished that everyone who read Lean On understood what she thought was one of the major takeaways from that book, which was that the more professionally successful a man becomes, he becomes more likable. And you know what's coming. The more professionally successful a woman becomes, she becomes less likable, because our stereotypes, our presumptions about what's appropriate and not appropriate are just so powerful. I mean, they are rooted in our DNA. They go back millennia. And so you say to yourself, okay, if that's the case, then what can we do about it? The second point she made, equally provocative, is that women are liked much more, viewed much more favorably when they are in service to someone else. So I was in service to our country and service to President Obama as a member of his cabinet in his first term. I left the State Department with a 69% approval rating. People thought I was doing a good job, and I was doing a good job because they could see me, standing up for our country, standing beside the president, trying to solve problems. And what was fascinating to me, it was really horrifying, but fascinating, was how effective it was to just begin to knock that down and to get to the point where, oh gosh, we don't know what we think about her. And Sheryl made this very clear. She said, if you are in service to someone else, you are viewed favorably. So in the workplace, If you go to your employer and you say, I really think Lissa should get a raise, she's been working so hard, you get points because you're viewed as somebody who is a real team player looking out for your colleagues. If you go and say, you know, I've been working really hard and I'd like to be considered for a raise, if you're a woman, it's held against you. If you're a man, it's not. And these are just attitudes that are deeply embedded in how we see women in the public arena. Now, I won the women's vote, but I lost the white women's vote. I got more white women's votes, however, than President Obama got in 2012. So the problem is one that Democratic nominees have to contend with, have to figure out how to communicate, break through better. Now, I personally believe that I was doing well enough with white women, even Republican white women, before the Comey letter. But it stopped my momentum, and it played into the concerns that women have about whether they are making a mistake with their vote. I started going door to door in politics many, many years ago. And I was always surprised when I would knock on a door and a woman would answer and I'd say, you know, I'm here for this candidate. And the woman would say, well, I just don't know enough. I don't want to make a mistake. And so that was my personal experience. And of course, taking it to the last month of this campaign, all of a sudden, people are being told, you know what? Something's going on. They're going to investigate her again or whatever. We could see that a lot of women, in particular, turned away. They were discouraged. I don't blame them. They didn't know what to believe. I mean, it was outrageous what happened. But so you've got to see how women are trying to do what they think of as the right thing for themselves and for their family. They're often under pressure from people around them. A lot of anecdotal evidence about that. So when a woman runs, she has to work extra hard to convince other women that she can do the job that she is running for. And we've made progress, not enough, in the Congress, in the Senate, way not enough in governors' offices, but getting people to feel comfortable at the presidential level is still a challenge. There's some statistics in my book that even among Democratic women and men, it's not 80 or 90% who think they'd like to see a woman president. It's in the high 60s for women, it's in the 40s for men, which is a lot more than it is for Republicans who just have a hard time thinking about a woman in the White House. So these are complicated psychological, emotional, political, economic issues. And if you think there's just one answer, you're probably going to be wrong. And so we have to look at a much broader set of responses and appeals to persuade women to vote for other women and then to try to make solidarity around that. You, one of the nice things in the book, though, is the incredible sense of support you have from your own friends, men and women, but especially women. You talk about your girlfriends being so, and that's been true forever for you. You've had these friendships that have gone on, and thank goodness for that, right? Because women really do come through for other women when they're at least close to each other. Next question from the audience, and we're coming close to our time, but we'll try to do these quickly. Actually, this is no question, but I'm drinking Chardonnay with you in solidarity. Can you demonstrate our alternate nostril breathing? Anyway. I really do highly recommend it. It's not that hard. Google it.
Yeah, okay. She's not going to demonstrate it, but you get the idea. What has been the most fulfilling part of your life so far?
My whole life?
What has been the most fulfilling part of your, I guess, yes, whole life so far?
Yeah, no, I mean, my family and my friends, obviously, for me, and doing work that I believed in and that I thought made a difference. I write in the book about, I write about my marriage and my husband. I write about my daughter and motherhood. I write about my mother. I write about my friends.
Your father.
Because at the end of the day, everybody has disappointments. Everybody has losses. I viewed this book as much about resilience as about running for president. Because for me, having the support and the encouragement that I got from my family during the campaign and certainly in the aftermath and from my friends, made all the difference as to, how I felt and whether I could, sort of summon the energy and the commitment to continue to play a public role on behalf of causes and values that I care about. So I think I'm a very fortunate person, and I want others, no matter what happens to you in life, to understand that there are ways to get up and keep going. And don't give up on yourself. Don't give up on your friends, on people you care about.
Here's a serious and question that I think we all are distressed about. What is your advice for federal workers facing the internal destruction of their agencies, especially at EPA and state? And we miss you.
Wow, I am so distressed because there's so much experience and expertise among federal employees across our government, and it's been hard won. It has been years in the making, and there seems to be a total disregard, even a contempt on the part of many in this administration for what federal workers know and what they've done and the advice that they can give. The other night, I was talking with Rachel Maddow about this when it came to the State Department, and I have such a high regard for so many of the, Foreign Service officers and civil servants that I worked with at all levels in the State Department. And I think about some of the crises that we confront, like North Korea, and, people who know the language, know the history, have experience in the Korean Peninsula and China and Japan, they should be sitting in meetings with the highest levels of this administration, providing advice and information that could be useful on behalf of our country. There is such a disdain, though, for federal workers. So I guess I would say, if you can stick it out, because the tide has to turn. And if we can take back one or both houses of Congress in 2018, you will have people you can talk to again. But I know how difficult that is, because I know what's happened to people that I worked with in the State Department, just really being frozen out and demeaned, mistreated. So I know it's not easy for me to say this, but I don't want us to lose the decades, really, if you added it all up, the thousands of years of experience in the EPA, in the State Department, in the Labor Department, in a lot of the places that are being targeted by the administration. So I hope that we can maintain a core of experienced public servants in our government, because at some point, they're going to need you, and the country's going to need you, and I hope you're still there.
We are going to have to wrap it up, unfortunately. I want one last audience question, though, was what's your favorite flavor of ice cream?
Oh, the hard questions that... My favorite flavor, I guess chocolate, anything with chocolate in it. You know, but I did want to just say a few more words about the future, because that's really what I'm most focused on. I think it was important to figure out what happened in order to be better prepared. And, you know, some of it is institutional, some of it is attitudinal, but it can all have an effect on not just our politics, but on who we are as Americans. And I'm concerned that a lot of permission has been given to people to be very bigoted, to be prejudiced, to lash out at others based on religion or gender or race and every other kind of identifying characteristic. And so I think it's very important that we not grow weary in standing up for what we see as core American values, not permitting the clock to be turned back and people's progress to be reversed. You know, there's a lot to be proud of that the resistance and people in the resistance are doing every single day. And of course, the great contrast that I write about between the inauguration on a Friday and the Women's March on a Saturday and holding the line on repealing the Affordable Care Act and saving insurance for millions of Americans is a really big deal. And there's ways for everybody to play a role. Not everyone will start an organization or run for office, but everybody can be sure your friends, everybody you know is registered to vote. You can be sure that if you have a free weekend, you can go canvass this year in Virginia or in New Jersey. You can start looking to see strategically where your vote will count the most, because in the 2018 election, there are going to be some very competitive seats. I won 24 congressional districts that have a Republican member of Congress in them. And so thinking hard about how you can support people who stick their necks out and decide they're going to run, you know, going online to combat untruths and attacks and vitriol, you know, be one of those people who is standing up and tweeting back or posting something on Facebook or making it clear that, you know, people are not going to be given a pass if they are promoting falsehoods and personal attacks and you know, really horrible positions, whether it's white supremacy or neo-Nazis or Ku Klux Klanners, whatever it might be, that, you know, we're not going to let that go unanswered because it's critical that people have a sustained commitment to taking our country back in the way that we believe it is at its best in order to have the kind of future that we believe is possible. And no one has more of a stake in that than young people. And so for me, I'm going to spend a lot of my time, you know, supporting young people, talking with young people, encouraging young people to understand the power of their votes, which is still the great unrealized opportunity in American politics, and to keep having relationships that, you know, cross every line that is meant to divide us, instead obliterate them, and to lead integrated, full lives with each other, and to be kind of the rebuke to those who want to divide us and undermine us. And I am very optimistic. I mean, at the end of the day, and at the end of my book, you know, I talk about love and kindness, something that we talked a lot about in the campaign, which, you know, was something that was my attempt to respond to the, you know, the sight of some of the rallies on the other side, you know, the veins bulging in necks and the yelling and the pushing and even the violence. And, you know, come on. You know, that's not who we are, or that's not who we should be. So at the end, I talk a lot about what I think we can do and should do going forward. And at the end of the book, I'm optimistic because I really believe that, you know, we always summon up the energy and get ourselves, you know, focused right and keep moving toward that more perfect union. And I'm going to do everything I can to help us get there.
And you start the book with Harriet Tubman, Keep Going, which has been a favorite of yours. And this book, by the way, is really in some ways a collection of your favorite sources of inspiration, quotes and phrases. And I thought that, first of all, thank you for not going quietly into the night.
Well, you know, I wanted, you know, I just wanted to say that none of us can afford to go quietly away. We need our voices, we need our energy. And yes, I really do believe it takes a village, or in this case, it takes a country to get us back on the right track. And it's very consistent with my belief that we have to bring people together to work together. And this, you know, this children's version of It Takes a Village, which is intended to say, you know what, we all have to work together, and maybe you think it's politically correct. I think it is America at its best. And so we're not going to go anywhere. We're still going to be here and still fighting and still moving.
And let me just end with a couple of quotes. You've been, you know, by using your voice, by writing this book, by being who you are, by supporting Onward Together and starting Onward Together, you are a model for a lot of people who wonder what they can do. And I just want to end with a few quotes that you include in your book. I think that we can all turn to as we resist, insist, persist, and enlist. Nelson Mandela, the greatest glory is not in never falling, but in rising every time you fall. Pope John the 23rd, concern yourself not with what you tried and failed, but what is still possible to do. One of your favorites, T.S. Eliot, there's only the trying. Ralph Waldo Emerson, life goes on. But here's the best one, and we will end on this one, and I think this one is most appropriate for this evening, most appropriate for you and what you've done for this country for the last 25 years and will for the next 25 plus years. From Maya Angelou, but still I rise. Thank you all very much for coming tonight.
Thank you.